Welcome to Bolt Amplify, a place where we explore and learn from the stories and insights of people cultivating new connections to the internet around the world. My name is Yutunde Olagbaju. I'm part of a collective called Influx, and this year we had the pleasure of working with the Internet Society Foundation and grantees of the Building Opportunities Leveraging Technologies Grant Program. We call it BOLT for short. The BOLT program supports technologists, engineers, and innovators building prototypes and pilot solutions for global internet connectivity and access. This year, the BOLT program focused on projects led by teams from Brazil and Kenya that strengthen the internet, ensuring its open, globally connected, and reliable access. We worked with these incredible leaders to collect and share stories, thoughts, and environmental sounds that articulate the impact of the BOLT grant on them, their work, and their respective communities. In these episodes, we'll get to know the BOLT grantees, their journey, insights, and visions for a connected future. Today, we're talking to Instituto Nupef. Their BOLT project aims to test new mesh network technology for an indigenous community, the Guajajara, based within the dense forests of the Amazon in northern Brazil. Nupef is working with them to build an autonomous solution in order to support their defense of the forest from illegal use and occupation. The indigenous communities Instituto Nupef works with are the guardians of the forest. The trees, animals, minerals within the soils and rock. The forest, it's not just their home, it's part of them. In this episode, we'll hear from Ona Castro and Rodrigo Troyan on how Nupef's work is at the forefront of internet connectivity within the Amazon forest and Brazil.
Hi there, I'm Meghna Mahadevan from Influx. In alignment with our values of storytelling, we want to add an editor's note to be explicit with you, the listener, about the lenses and layers from which a story is being told. This episode was recorded over the course of a year over great distance. This was recorded in Portuguese and carefully translated to English by Sunshine Adams. As with any translation, the transfer of meaning is never exact. We would also like to share here a note from Ona Castro of Nupef.
This is a really short disclaimer to say that I'm a white, 43-year-old woman who is not entitled to speak on behalf of any indigenous movement or indigenous person who are living in the territory and doing their work every day to protect the forest. So what I tried to do here sometimes was to give some context to my interviewers, but I don't feel comfortable doing that, and I would like to say that I'm sorry if I made some mistakes, and also that I would love to have our partners in the territories' voices brought by the end of the project. When we are there, we can record something so they will share their perspective, their context, their lives, and how communication systems have been important to them. So I think this is the most valuable content we can have by the end of the project.
Meu nome é Ona Castro e eu sou diretora de desenvolvimento institucional do Instituto Nupef.
Hello, my name is Ona Castro, and I'm the Director of Institutional Development at the Nupef Institute. I'm a journalist, but I've been working with nonprofit organizations for over 20 years and have always focused on the rights to communication and advancing digital rights.
Hello, my name is Rodrigo Troyan. I'm currently the technical coordinator of the Nupef Institute, and I come from a path of free software activism and technical life since the end of the 90s. Before the internet, You could call from one phone to another phone and connect to computers. That was BBS. I was a ham radio student at that time. I already liked technology. I was already what was later understood as a nerd. And at that time, I already used the internet to research amateur radios around the world, how to communicate with other amateur radios that weren't just over the air, but through this new way of communication that was being created, which was the internet.
I started using the internet here in 1995, 96. In 96, if I'm not mistaken, it was the first time I used Alta Vista Netscape to research narcissism on the web, which is quite curious, right?
Hoje na Nupef somos time de pessoas.
Today at Nupef, we are a team of people who work together on community network projects. We have extensive experience in implementing networks in Quilombola communities, which are a group of traditional peoples, and in more recent years, working with indigenous peoples. Each ethnicity, each location is unique, and that is a very complicated thing. We could say that each ethnic group is a world apart, with its own stories, values, and characteristics. In this case, for example, we are working with the Guajajara indigenous community, who have a fantastic relationship with collective construction. So, normally our process when it comes to community networks is based on bringing technologies that previously belonged to the world of hackers, such as exchanging systems, building cables, implementing systems around the world, or sharing specific technical knowledge for people without technical knowledge.
A gente está trabalhando, vai trabalhar na terra Caru, na TI Terra Indígena Caru, com aldeias que são as aldeias Massaré.
We are going to work in the Garu indigenous land in the Masaranduba village. This village is one of the bases of the Guardians of the Forest and Guajajara warriors. This is the village with which we have worked initially. We first implemented a community network with them, a territorial protection network, where we brought a link to the base and spread it throughout the work area of the Guardian's base. We also worked with them on low frequency radio, HF radio, and amateur radio. We left one in the base, we put one in the car, and then they could talk long distance into the forest.
Imagine that this region must be larger than many European countries. Not the Karoo indigenous land itself, but the state of Maranhão is larger than many European countries. So this expanse of land is huge and the forest is very dense. There are many trees. The heat is quite strong. The humidity is very high. You're always wet here in Maranhão and Pará. In most places, you're in a permanent sweat with all that humidity.
I see Brazil similar to a broccoli. The top of the broccoli, up there, is where the Amazon rainforest is, where we have the largest area of forest. If we were to look for where the Karoo land is, it would be the lower part beneath it, within the limits of the Pindare River. In other words, this is what we imagine when we arrive in an area of preserved Amazon rainforest, where we are on the edge of a virgin forest. What does that mean? It means that the Karoo indigenous land has remained the same for a long time. And this means that when we arrive at these villages, we don't see the village itself. The villages are well above river levels.
It's a land, an indigenous reserve, that was demarcated. It is occupied by indigenous people who were occupying this territory when the Portuguese arrived in Brazil, and they continue to occupy these territories. These indigenous lands have something that we call people's self determination. They have a principle that those who govern, those who can say how indigenous lands should function, are the indigenous people. This is guaranteed by our constitution, and there's a very strong debate now happening in Brazil about this. There's a dispute over which indigenous lands should be governed by indigenous people and which can be appropriated by non indigenous people.
O povo Guajajara é povo que tem contato com não indígenas há muito
The
tempo.
Guajajara people have been in contact with non indigenous people for a long time. There are more than 360 years of contact with non indigenous people. So, they are a group of people that present very considerable characteristics of miscegenation and acculturation and adaptation to non indigenous customs. We have houses made from old structures, houses made of straw, clay, wood, to houses made of brick and modern materials. The people we work with are very determined, warrior like people. The Guajajara people are accustomed to collective work, working with wood and materials, and at the same time, they are very fun and very funny people with a very specific sense of humor.
Terras indígenas no Brasil são muito ameaçadas, desde sempre.
Indigenous lands in Brazil have always been very threatened, right? The indigenous people, their lifestyle, the land where they live, their lives, those of their families and those who want to remain and continue with the right to live where their ancestors always lived, and the way that they lived, have always been threatened. And the threats occur in different ways. They can be direct threats by larger farmers or miners, people who want to explore the land and want to occupy the land and want to remove the indigenous people from there to do that, or people who want to illegally use the land and remove the resources, be it trees, be it minerals, be it animals, wood, metals, gold, etc., that exist on the land and take it away with them. So, this is one kind of threat. The other type of threat is a cultural threat from people who want to make the indigenous life different or take the indigenous people away so that they can become urbanized, so that they can take on a more westernized culture, etc. Another threat is a threat to the land use. They don't even necessarily want to remove the indigenous people, but they want to threaten and use the land. So, what is in question at the moment in Brazil is not even how to govern indigenous lands, but rather who has the right to remain on indigenous lands. What markers of when the indigenous people were there will make the state say, this land is indigenous, it belongs to the indigenous people?
A gente sempre teme, Leandro, não tem como não temer, né? Não tem como não temer, afinal de contas, nós estamos aqui por pura resistência e por pura insistência, né, para continuar garantindo esses direitos, porque a tentativa sempre foi essa mesmo de acabar com direitos indígenas, né, de não cumprir, e o Congresso Nacional tem se fortalecido cada vez mais.
The environment for indigenous people is not something external. It's something they're a part of. They feel and are an integrated part of nature. Different from, the white populations that come to occupy, who treat nature as something external. In indigenous culture, everything is one thing. So destroying the indigenous land where they and their ancestors have always lived is destroying their lives. And yes, invasions and threats are also literally destroying lives.
Eu gostaria de relembrar que os Guardiões da Floresta são grupo organizado de forma estruturada e militarizada.
I would like to remind you that the Guardians of the Forest are a group organized in a structured and militarized way, formed by indigenous people from the Guajajara ethnic groups mainly, but also with the support of other ethnic groups who also shared nearby indigenous lands, such as the Kaapor and the Gaviao. Their main function is to report the occurrence of crimes in their territory. Their indirect action is not objective. They do not act in direct confrontation as their main function. They end up getting into situations of engagement because, well, the function is to warn the Brazilian authorities so that they will act in a way that does use force against these illegal actions. So, when we talk about this, we have to remember that they're a group that is structured for security, but not with the function of overt action, but rather protective and guarding action. So, our action with the Guajajara people, with the Guardians of the Forest in particular, has been a process of improving communication systems to help inform the authorities of the Brazilian state.
Como eu vejo o impacto da internet?
How do I see the impact of the internet on our work and the impact of our work on the internet? By bringing new visions, new ethnicities, new human groups to the internet, I see that our impact is in allowing the internet to be a more plural place, a place where more voices are heard, more faces are spread, more cultures themselves. So I see that as I bring the internet to traditional people, I enrich the internet as a whole with the knowledge and traditions that these people can share. At the same time, I see that the impact of the internet on these people occurs in different ways. I'm not going to be a hypocrite and say there isn't a use for entertainment. Fun is an element of the internet. We all know that the internet was made for looking at cute cats. But aside from that point, it is also a place where we inform ourselves, and information is a tool. I have had reports of impacts where indigenous communities who sold cacao changed their relationships with their cacao buyers after learning how to identify the value of cacao on the stock exchange open to everyone. In other words, hey, you don't fool me. I have a cell phone connected to the internet, and I know how much my product is worth today. Which is an inversion of, which is an empowerment through tools. I believe that while the internet is enriched by the addition of new people, I believe that new people are enriched by the information the internet has.
Our project, under the Internet Society's BOLT program, is going to test the new use of wireless technologies to improve connectivity by building wireless networks, most often what we call mesh networks, in extensive communities, sparse communities, with low population density, but at the same time with many trees, a high forest density, especially in the north and in the legal Amazon area in the northeast, in Maranhão, for example. It's been almost 7 years that Nupef has been implementing community networks in indigenous, quilombola, and quebradeiras de coco babaçu communities. This project of Nupef will test other Wi-Fi technologies to try to achieve better quality networks, permanent access, and access at an affordable cost for these communities.
Primeiro, acho que vamos dar passo atrás.
Let's take a step back. Let's understand the context in which this is happening. Brazil has a very uneven distribution of internet infrastructure. And what I mean by this is some areas have a lot of infrastructure, a very fast internet at a reasonable cost for the purchasing power of that population. Other areas have very slow internet, which is very expensive for what is offered. In other areas, there's no internet at all. Some of the areas today do not have any internet or mobile internet. That is, no mobile phone signal, 4G, 3G, 5G, or internet, home broadband, fiber optics, or other solutions. So, there are areas that do not have any internet access through these routes. One of these areas is the middle of the forest. And one of the technologies that made some internet access possible was satellite internet. Those who live in the middle of the forest can't access this. The signal doesn't get through well. You need an infrastructure that requires electricity to have internet. You need to get a signal and install the modem that will pick up that signal. And the cost of this geostationary satellite internet is very high. So, this Nupef project is going to try to solve a problem of connectivity in areas with high forest density that do not receive services through traditional technologies, such as cable, radio, or cell phone. So, because they are also below what is called the magnetic anomaly of the South Atlantic, other additional difficulties related to the satellite signal arise. Our test for our project will involve a pilot using the very high frequency or ultra high frequency bands, as well as other more recent technologies, Wi Fi, using the unused spaces of the spectrum called white spaces or digital TV white space.
Voltando quanto ao nosso processo, buscamos desmistificar.
Returning to our process, we seek to demystify. We seek to show that equipment doesn't break, doesn't bite, doesn't shock, if you know where to get it and how to deal with it. And in this process, Bulch does a little of that for us. Bulch brings us a proposal to look for innovation, look for equipment, technologies that we have not been using until now. So at this moment, we are going through the demystification process, buying equipment, understanding how it works, trying to understand its cycle and its functions. And after that, we can pass on this knowledge to the people who will actually use it. So, our project happens in 3 phases. Buy, understand, choose equipment, implement this equipment and understand how it works, and leave this equipment and people trained so that as soon as we leave, they maintain it and continue using it. This will be our first experience with technologies that cross the forest, and therefore, we have a whole new set of equipment and knowledge that we are seeking and that will be reported. In the case of a success or failure, both will be reported as knowledge for the use of technologies in Amazonian territories.
Bom, então eu gostaria, na verdade, que houvesse mais infraestrutura, que houvesse mais empresas.
I would actually like for there to be more infrastructure, more companies, more state, more public and private investment in infrastructure providing internet in these lands for a long time. But the fact is that there aren't. And all of the state's attempts to create connectivity plans in the Amazon have been a fiasco. Those planned public policies won't significantly advance access for populations in the north and northeast regions of the Amazon forest, in the legal Amazon that we call it. They were unable to solve this problem.
Broadband mega constellation Starlink.
And we saw ela tá causando muito impacto porque ela
Then the arrival of Starlink. It is causing a lot of impact because it somehow resolves a problem that these populations and the state had for a long time, and private companies too. Private companies that find it very expensive to create infrastructures in these areas of land say that the investment is too high to not have a return that will pay for this investment, even with the state giving several incentives for them to create this infrastructure. But neither the market nor the state was able to do this. So the arrival of Starlink responds to a demand for internet in this area that has existed for a long time and was not, as I can say, resolved by any public or private policy. What we're going to do with this, how we're going to analyze the impact of this massive arrival of the internet in the Amazon, is what we need to evaluate. The same capacity for self-determination, the same right to self-determination of peoples that indigenous people have to determine what they will do with their lands and how they will manage their lands is self-determination. This guarantees them a say in how and with what limits they want to use the internet.
A single point that I would like to add to the concept of using low-orbit satellites, especially Starlink, is this revolution that they bring by allowing the user to be the installer of their solution. So, first of all, one of the great service barriers to entry into the Brazilian market, and especially the Amazon region, is its great breadth. Sending an installer to each of the communities is a complex, expensive, and time consuming thing. When the user themselves can purchase their equipment and take it to their location, it ends up lowering the barrier of entry for this use. Which, on the one hand, is fantastic, as it allows people who previously depended on someone to now be able to bring their equipment. But on the other hand, it ends up generating a lot of problems with illegal use in Brazil by miners, loggers, and other people with no good intentions. I think my point in particular is a technology that comes in a way that brings many changes. It can help, and it can also create problems. And, in my opinion, the point is, this business model is better suited to continental areas. So, the interest, from where I see it, is purely profit with the technical capacity passed on to third parties.
Tem mais ponto que eu gostaria de acrescentar em relação à nossa preocupação.
There's one more point that I'd like to add in relation to our concern with the arrival of low orbit satellites, and in particular Starlink, which concerns the fact that because it is the best solution and a solution that is the most possible to spread, it is spreading not only among farmers, but also among indigenous people and also among illegal miners. We have the challenge here, which is economic concentration and the concentration of power in the hands of a company. Today, there are other low orbit satellite companies operating in Brazil with authorization to operate. But they are not selling the service at retail, that is, to any user, which means that this has been the only alternative in several areas of the Amazon region. This means that in a few years, Elon Musk will have in his hands the power to turn indigenous people on or off the internet. And I'm not saying that because I'm crazy about conspiracy theories. I'm speaking because there have already been reports of how controversial the use of Starlink was in Ukraine, that at some point it stopped working in Ukraine. Ukraine was using it in its bases to resist the Russian invasion, and suddenly this link was disconnected. There were accusations that this was an abuse. So we also have a concentration of information on traffic, right, from indigenous people. Let's remember that a cell phone, a mobile device connected to the internet, is a surveillance instrument, right? Let's remember what Snowden taught us about using the internet for surveillance. So this is not a conspiracy theory, and this is not an accusation that this is necessarily happening. But there is a potential risk of putting too much power in the hands of a single company, a company led by a visionary investor in cutting-edge technologies who has never hidden his political controversies, his engagement in public debate, and taking political positions at various times in the world. So we're not even talking about neutral technology, but much less about specific companies, right? I would like to publicly thank Rodrigo Troya for raising this proposal for us. I write projects, but many ideas don't come out of my head, much less alone. And this is one of those that came to mind for Troya and Carlos Afonso, our executive director, after many conversations and reading about similar experiences in other places. But if this project of using the blank spaces left by digital TV, of the transition from analog to digital, works out so that we can connect the internet across the forest, then we, Nupef and civil society, will have a gigantic job, another road to cross, which concerns regulation, which concerns the permission to use the equipment, which concerns the approval of equipment, which concerns the sale of this equipment in Brazil. So what we're talking about here is a project that will bring other new problems for us if it goes well, if it is a success. But good problems. Problems that will bring an option too. We were talking about having no option for the middle of the forest other than low orbit satellites not long ago. If this project is successful, it means we have options.
Eu vou contar uma história sobre uma outra terra indígena chamada Tenondeporã.
I'm going to tell a story about another indigenous land called Tenondeporã, which is in the São Paulo region, which is a much more urbanized region. But on its outskirts in Guarulhos, on the outskirts of the urban region in São Paulo, there is an indigenous land. And there, because of the highways and urbanization around them that pass through the indigenous land, there's infrastructure for the internet. As a result of the use of indigenous land for internet infrastructure, the community acquired access to this internet. So they have high-speed internet, high-quality optical fiber in the middle of indigenous land. And then what happened? After using that internet for a while, they called a partner organization of ours called Intervozes to talk and see how they could help limit the use of the internet in that village, in that indigenous territory. Why? Because the presence of the internet all day was taking young people away from community life. The youth were just using the internet all day long and weren't participating in community activities. They weren't wanting to attend the classes they had at the indigenous school that they had created. They weren't wanting to participate in the activities proposed by the community that they had always participated in before. So they had a conversation. It cannot continue like this. Our children and teenagers cannot stay away from life in the community. And Intervozes came to talk to us, asking what we suggested, and we recommended some measures and also a person, a technician, to do the work with them. And they limited the hours of access that would be allowed within that community. They limited access to certain advertisements, right? So they put limits on advertising pop-ups because it increases consumption a lot. The logic of consumption is strongly implemented. It affects, the indigenous youth. They realized that the internet had several advantages. It was causing many benefits, but it was also causing harm to the life that they wanted to continue establishing in that community.
E quanto à juventude na internet, eu acredito que temos a internet, ao meu ver,
The internet, in my opinion, is one of the best places for two things: to learn and have fun. So I would say to young people and people who come and listen to us about our projects that, yes, the internet is a fantastic place and we have a lot of learning, a lot of fun. We need to maintain contact with it, but always remember our contact with the real world, with the use of tools, with the political and social impact that our knowledge and our existence can have on others. Let's not just be consumers, let's be producers. Let's not just be people who want to know, but people who want to share, because there's always something you can teach others.
And then on my gratitude list, I could thank many people, including the entire Nupef team, which actually allows us to do this work, from the administrative staff who make so many things possible, and the people who do field production, from the people who coordinate other projects with us and who also bring ideas and help us formulate them, and from the people who are liaising with other organizations in the field. But I will specifically name a few here, namely our executive director, Carlos Alfonso, who has been raising questions, bringing these TV white space issues to us for a long time. But not only that, he has been teaching us about the internet. He made this possible workspace for us that is Nupef. Claudio Guajajara, who I don't know personally, but Troya can tell you more about him, who is the person who is the point contact there in the Karu indigenous land, who has done important work there, not only as a guardian of the forest, but also in dialogue with us, right? ESPN as a whole, which is the partner organization, took us to the Karu indigenous land for the first time and has been in constant dialogue with various indigenous lands, with various indigenous peoples about their needs and technology, and talking to us also. Moacir is a great one, the name of the second coach of this project along with Troya. He is an engineer, he is in telecommunications, or almost an engineer, he's studying for a bachelor's degree. And of course, how can we not mention the Internet Society, which is supporting us with this investment, which believed in us and in the potential of this project, in the potential for experimentation and transformation of this project. And I also thank you for helping us tell this story.
Their insights, process, work in internet connectivity, and support of Indigenous autonomy and articulation of all the nuances in between has inspired us. If you want to learn more about Nupef and their impactful work, please visit their website at www.nupef.org.br. That's www.nupef.org.br. Along with my collaborators Meghna Mahadevan and Neha Shingane, we'd like to thank the Internet Society for the opportunity to meet and collaborate with Ona and Troyan. We'd also like to thank the rest of the Nupef team. Shout out to Paulo Duarte, Moacir Neto, and Carlos Ofonso for their collaboration, time, and energy. We'd love to thank our translator and editor, Sunshine Adam. Your work in translating Nupef's story is so full of integrity. We could not have done this without you, and appreciate you so much. We'd also like to thank our wonderful sound engineer, Leah Ann Lafembert Mitchell. And lastly, thank you to you, dear listener. We hope this gives you some great insight into the world of internet connectivity within Indigenous lands and within Brazil. Be sure to check out our third episode, where you'll hear from us, Influx. We'll be there talking about our process for the Bolt Amplify grant and our reflections on our relationship to the internet.